Welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight, the new Totalitarians, the UK cultural revolution. I'm not exaggerating. It's actually happened, hasn't it? There is every chance, though, first of all, that by the end of this year, information will be getting very hard to access. And the platform that we currently broadcast on stops live broadcasting on the 31st of December this year. We will be moving to Podbean. You can subscribe to Podbean on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. We are currently on Spreaker, and you can download our full archive on the live shows page and on Spreaker. And also, if you don't want to sign into Spreaker, you can listen and download on Podbean. Podbean only have the RSS feed at the moment, but we are going to be moving over to them quite soon. I think it will be a safer space for all. So, with current events unfolding, we're going to see more restrictions on what was once called free speech. What is actually coming for the UK in particular is unprecedented, and strategy is and will be essential. It has all happened very fast, hasn't it, since Starmer and the globalist Labour Corporation came to power. Let's go back to 1966. Mao in China launched the Cultural Revolution by influencing the youths to violently remove the capitalist representatives and introduce the communism methods after destroying and denouncing the capitalist style and old methods which he dictated were based on old customs, old culture, old habits and old ideas. This is why we are seeing the destruction of culture and history. The population have been neutralised through fear in just a few days. This is no different from the Cultural Revolution in China. This has been done in a slightly different way, but the population of the UK have effectively been silenced with just the threat of being thrown in prison for merely going out on the streets, because that's what this really adds up to. That's what this is really about. It's not about people protesting or rioting. It's scaring the population through making an example of people who may have got caught up in skirmishes, holding them in prison after being charged, no remand, no bail, straight to prison, and then they're charged within days and sentenced. Of course, this is only what would happen in a totalitarian regime. There have been no army on the streets, only meme distributors who describe themselves as, yes, you got it, anti-fascists and anti-Nazis. Well, of course, neither of these exist. The silencing through fear came about through the equivalent of snatch squads who rounded up anyone involved. The visible troublemakers first, of course, then the rest. Around 780 people are experiencing the new justice system, which has been imposed in the last few days, being arrested, charged and kept in prison for immediate trials. There is no difference here than in any totalitarian regime. They have not been executed or put into work camps, but the principle is exactly the same. This was, of course, to put fear into anyone who may have a reasonable voice regarding mass immigration and other unpopular policies. It seems to have worked so far. The threats being issued by the Starmer regime after the recent coup go against all inalienable rights of expression. The state party are celebrating their victory against the majority by organising a vocal minority who are the only ones they're the only ones allowed to hold public displays by shouting meaningless catchphrases like fascist scum off our streets, etc. I don't know anyone who still follows the policies of Mussolini or General Franco, and the only Nazis left seem to be in Ukraine. In fact, Franco made housing cheap and affordable and ownership easier and protected national sovereignty. So maybe they are correct in saying people in the UK are fascists. The old ideas have now been officially swept away. This was done with a manufactured show of strength, wasn't it, by what are ideologically called the far left. This show tonight will also look at the new totalitarian policies in education. These are all being announced on the back of the disruption that has recently occurred due to the murder of 3 children. Education and re-education is the most important communist area of indoctrination, of course. Weaponising the young against those who know the system is essential. There has been demoralisation and destabilisation, of course, through the creation of identity groups to be used as weapons against not only each other, but against all who do not fall for the two lies of the right and the left. And then, just like that, the country is united against any ideology other than that of the UN goals, including, of course, the mass immigration or replacement migration, which is on the UN website and, according to the new regime, a conspiracy theory. So, all opposing views to the international financiers and UN plan of demoralisation, destabilisation, crisis and normalisation has been swept away by the metaphorical and in many cases real communists on the streets of Britain. After just one day, their victory has been announced and the country normalised. Britain has been conquered according to all official sources. Do check out the last live stream we did, Have You Been Normalised, on our YouTube channel. Also, of course, now gone to Odyssey. All the links on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. Have a look at that and have a look at last week's show, because that's the last one in the archive, of course. And then you can have a look at Global Mafia Win UK election. We've been talking about this for a month now, and look what's happened so far. The UK is definitely the focus of the globalist agenda. I mean, of course, the United States is, and all the Crown territories, but Britain is the target. And all this has happened since the Starmer regime came to power. The speed with which the new totalitarianism is being enforced is incredible, isn't it? Laws are being changed, the legal system has been openly subverted, and a theatre of psychological war has been in play. The war, pitching fake left against fake right to demonise ordinary citizens concerned about immigration and impositions from external governing bodies, such as, of course, think tanks and NGOs, which control all public opinion. Well, this has never happened faster. The speed at which this state revolution against the people has occurred is comparable only to countries undergoing a coup or a manufactured revolution. When you look at what has happened and how the population have been threatened with prison for even reposting memes, and of course the lack of process in the arrests, fast-track court appearances, no bail, straight to jail, these are the outcomes for protesters. This has historically only ever been seen in organised coups and revolutions. That's just a fact. In summary, there were some protests by the newly labelled far right in response to the murder of children in Southport, Merseyside, by a now 18-year-old Rwandan from Cardiff. He was seen earlier in his life posing outside a Doctor Who TARDIS and apparently was a budding actor. We will never know anything about this person, as all information is controlled, same as with any other terror event. There were protests and some disturbances on August the 7th, which was on the anniversary, by the way, of the 2011 Tottenham riots, where heavy-duty police armoured vehicles were rolled out for the first time. The protests started this year on the 7th of August, and there were no more so-called far-right protests after the 8th of August. The day after, the state announced that there were 40 more such protests planned. They, of course, failed to materialise. That number has now jumped to over 100. But there were only 38, I think, on the day, which, of course, was a set-up because they were never planned and were never meant to happen. In their place, an anonymous and faceless group called Stand Up to Racism very speedily organised events all over the country. And this could, of course, have been planned before the previous day's protests. In other words, they may have known in advance that all this was coming. In other words, the initial protests were announced by the state to deliberately not happen, to indicate that the government labelled far right, or the people who are under the governance of the so-called far right, were indeed just a tiny minority. This is just gaslighting of the population. Well, a post on standuptoracism.org.uk advertising the numerous locations for the counter-protests was actually dated on the 10th of August. Let's have a look at this website, standuptoracism.org.uk, who seem to organise and control all of these counter-protests. Relevant dates, let's have a look. The website was registered on the 12th of February 2014. Its expiry date is the 12th of February 2025, and it was last updated on the 29th of July 2024. There is no registered address, only a PO box, which is in Tottenham, N17 1HP. We know absolutely nothing about this group or anyone associated with it. Its anonymity is odd, but more than that, it is also quite suspicious. Who are they, and why are they hiding the identities of any of their staff and contributors? There is nobody named on that website, and nothing has a name on it. Nothing. A Stop Rwanda campaign on the website was cancelled on the 29th of July, and that was actually the last time anything significant was done on that website. They align themselves with the TUC, Care for Calais, National Education Union, ASLEF Unite, Muslim Association of Great Britain, Peace and Justice Project, TSSA, CWU, NAPO, which are all unions, of course, Stop the War, the RMT, the Jewish Socialist Group, the People's Assembly, there you go, Consensus, Positive Action on Housing, Extinction Rebellion, BARAC, Afghan Rights Association, and USDAW. Those are the ones that they're disclosing on their website anyway. Their latest post was Stop the Far Right, National Day of Protest, Saturday the 10th of August. And that was posted by Stand Up to RAC. So basically, no person posted that. It's entirely anonymous. There is nothing about anybody on this website. And that National Day of Protest was posted on, it says, the 10th of August 2024. Their last previous post was on March the 20th, 2021. A long time ago. So this is like a sleeper cell, which is basically seemingly used when necessary, as in the last few days. And that March the 20th, 2021 post was United Nations Anti-Racism Day, World Against Racism Day of Action, posted the 1st of March 2021. As I said, their website has no registered address, no names of its founders, no information whatsoever. It merely advertises and drives protests. In fact, they post hardly anything on there. No articles, no ideology, no information whatsoever. Their soundbite mimetic rhetoric on their entirely anonymous website states, like the brown shirts in Nazi Germany, the fascist thugs want to intimidate and threaten all those who oppose them, not just Muslims. There is a multicultural majority in this country. Together, let's stand up to the far right and politicians like Nigel Farage who enable them. Refugees are welcome, fascists are not. It's the same old template as Hope Not Hate and perceives the terror threat to be the indigenous population of Great Britain. Unless, of course, they are extreme far-left Marxist communists. The UK schools have been announced as indoctrination camps over the last 2 days. In a recent gaslighting attack in the UK Guardian, a think tank states, in inverted commas, two-tier. UK treats far-right attacks less harshly than Islamist violence, says think tanks. Exclusive. Defence think tank RUSI says right-wing violence, often classified as mere thuggery by politicians and prosecutors, the UK in effect has a two-tier approach, it says, to extremism that fails to treat far-right attacks as seriously as Islamist ones. A leading think tank has said, well, we've had the era of Islamic terrorism. That is now over, of course. So that is absolutely a lie, because after 2017, we didn't get any of these attacks from the so-called extreme Islamists. There hasn't been any. So the British establishment realised this was no longer necessary. That's in effect what it means. Okay, let's have a look at who this think tank is. The Royal United Services Institute says right-wing violence is often classified as mere thuggery by politicians, prosecutors and the security services. Equivalent acts by Islamists would swiftly be labelled as terrorism. Can you see what they're doing here? We did have Islamic terrorism. Whether that was state-sponsored, state-delivered or not is irrelevant. It was called and known as Islamic terrorism. So that is absolute BS. This, of course, is saying that it was quoted in an article in, of course, where else? The Guardian. A week of riots across England and Northern Ireland that have targeted asylum hotels and mosques have been fuelled by, wait for it, you guessed it, neo-Nazi and extreme right activity. As there were no neo-Nazis in sight, of course, and the Birmingham Muslims who told the police they would police their own protest actually beat up someone outside a pub, attempted to slash the tyres of a Sky News van and showed weapons publicly. And these are the people who the police allowed to police themselves because they told the police they were going to police themselves. So tell me what's two-tier here. Absolute gaslighting's going on now. So yes, they even showed weapons publicly and no police attended. One might think that there was propaganda afoot, and I think one might be right. Let's now go to the UK Daily Telegraph. The Telegraph. The UK Daily Telegraph. That will actually be after a very short break, because I've been going 18 minutes and I need a drink of water. So let's have a short break. Be back in a minute. Welcome back to Windows on the World, and now we're going to be looking at the Daily Telegraph. Used to be called the Daily Telegraph, didn't it? This is by Nick Gutteridge, Chief Political Correspondent, 10th of August 2024. Schools to wage war on putrid fake news in anti-extremism crackdown. Pupils will be taught to spot conspiracy theories in a curriculum revamp after riots sweep UK. Isn't it strange that they never did this in 2011 rather, on the 7th of August, when real riots went all over the UK, okay? They were probably stirred up and led like most of these, but they were in fact real, and there was a lot more damage in 2011. But because of one day in the UK where things got a little bit out of hand, yes, there was a bit of rioting, but there were also implanted infiltrators, agent provocateurs leading that violence. That is absolutely 100% the case. So they've used that to revamp the curriculum. So the revamp on the curriculum, I would suggest, was already in place well before these riots. This has just been used to announce it all. So the curriculum revamp after riots swept the UK. After the riots, pupils as young as 5 will be given the critical thinking skills to identify misinformation online. As young as 5? Well, the only place that sort of thing would happen is in China, isn't it? Or in a real dictatorial regime. No 5-year-old could deal with what misinformation is, because obviously they still believe in such creations as Father Christmas, which is not a bad thing. It's something to look forward to, and children have imaginations. That should be encouraged. It says schools will use lessons such as English, ICT, information and communication technology, and maths to arm, in inverted commas, arm pupils against, inverted commas, putrid conspiracy theories. Well, putrid is a word that would be quite hard to explain to a 5-year-old, really, wasn't it? What about smelly? That might be better. The Education Secretary has said. So as all MPs are now indoctrinated as well as vetted to make sure they do not have any beliefs outside the accepted narrow corridor of opinion, well, it's now getting to everybody. And of course, indoctrination starts in the schools. The paper warning MPs about conspiracy theories and how all of it was somehow based on anti-Semitism will be repeated in the indoctrination camps known as schools and academies. Bridget Phillipson told The Telegraph that pupils as young as 5 would be given the critical thinking skills. How can you have critical thinking at 5 years old? This is in parallel, as we've just said, with all communist regimes. The intervention came as a 13-year-old boy was charged on Saturday with violent disorder in Manchester following trouble in the area. So a teenager misbehaved, so what? Ms Phillipson said, "It's more important than ever that we give young people the knowledge and skills to be able to challenge what they see online. That's why our current curriculum review will develop plans to embed critical skills in lessons to arm children against disinformation, fake news and yes again, putrid conspiracy theories awash on social media." Who used this word putrid? Why would you use that? Well, they're not very bright, these people, but they do like a meme, don't they? Nothing more putrid and stinking than those who are behind all this, of course. It says our renewed curriculum will always put high and rising standards in core subjects first. That's non-negotiable. But alongside this, we will create a broad, knowledge-rich curriculum that widens access to cultural subjects and gives pupils the knowledge and skills they need to thrive at work and throughout life. I wonder what sort of cultural subjects they will be teaching them. Well, it will have to be in line, of course, with the new unity in community and diversity of communitarianism. So we don't want any uncomfortable historical truths in there, do we? Apart from, of course, slavery and stuff like that. Usual NLP word salad that these overpaid agents of change have written for them. Yes, they have this stuff usually written for them. They just reiterate it, regurgitate it when necessary, because they haven't got anything going on in their minds at all. It came, it says, as Britain's top police officer, or I would suggest, propagandist, ex-MI5 and head of data gathering company Black Dot, Mark Rowley, urged people to step back from social media sites that have been accused of influencing rioters, who have included youngsters. Writing for The Telegraph, Chief Constable Gavin Stevens, the chairman of the National Police Chiefs Council, said that perhaps we should be deleting a lot more than we share. Specialist organised crime detectives have been assigned to go after influencers with large followings who have, wait for it, spread hate and incited violence. Well, spreading hate and inciting violence is, of course, already illegal. What do they actually mean by all this, though? What they define hate as is, of course, the question never properly answered. It says the far-right riots that have raged for a fortnight were sparked by false claims online that an asylum seeker had carried out the Southport stabbings. Well, the use of one post to justify this clampdown is, of course, very transparent and very revealing. It would not be a surprise if the inaccurate post was indeed an inside job. Either way, it has been used for what they call change in the ideological subversion business. There is every chance this Rwandan child wannabe actor could have been targeted and, let's say, influenced by intelligence sources. This has been proven to happen before, with Muslims being targeted and used by MI5. During the last wave of terror around the 2017 times, the culprits appeared to be under influence and all were known to MI5. Let's not forget Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, who was basically hypnotized to do what he did, get onto a plane with a bomb in his shoe. The whole thing was ridiculous. He was ushered onto the plane by intelligence services. That's a known fact. So we shouldn't forget all this Islamic terror of the past, not to demonize Muslims with. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that the state has agitated people and found people who may be not very bright to be patsies for these terror attacks. So this article in the Telegraph goes on. They were inflamed by more and more sophisticated forms of disinformation, including websites set up to imitate those of newspapers and broadcasters. Well, wait a minute. A website's either a website or it's a newspaper, right? If it's a publication, it says on it. This is just nonsense. Like what? Did they give any examples? Not one example of this type of disinformation is given. Not one. No one can actually do that anyway, as it's copyright infringement. If you set up something that looks like the Daily Mail or the Sun, they'll be on to you within hours. Absolutely ridiculous. They mean news channels which are not the BBC or part of the controlled opposition, such as GB News. That's what they mean. Government sources said the unrest showed the risk of young people being sucked into dangerous online spaces and needed to be urgently addressed. Miss Phillipson is now reviewing the primary and secondary school curriculum. Who the hell is she to do this? Isn't this meant to be done by a body of people? Saying it was failing to prepare enough of our children for work and for life. Well, what's she done all her life? Let's have a look. Let's have a look at her CV. See what useful things she's brought to the community. What good stuff has she done for humanity? I think we'll find there's very little. Maybe I'm being a bit judgmental, but that's the way it appears. All they want, really, is a still tongue and an easy life. Of course, it doesn't prepare them for anything going to school other than to be subservient drones, apart from, of course, learning to speak, read and write and possibly add up. None of it is of any use. Well, I know, because I was there at the time, and now it is pointless sending children to school unless you want to be turned on by them when the state has recruited them to spy on you. And that's the way it's going. The review, it says, will look at teaching children to spot and dismiss extremist content by, inverted commas, embedding critical think. What does that mean? Indoctrinating them with, yes, the lie, the big lie, not even the two lies. They certainly won't be embedding anything like critical thinking skills that would require correct information from different sources. That you can guarantee. The planned changes, it says, will help children identify all extremist content, including far-left conspiracy theories and religion-based propaganda. I wonder if they'll be giving them examples like standuptoracism.org UK, Hope Not Hate, the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, as misinformation channels. Well, they should do, shouldn't they? If we're going to have a fair and evenly balanced education. It says one example could involve using English classes to dissect newspaper reports, examining their style and use of language compared to fake news. So they define what fake news is, of course. Would that be starting with the subservient and subversive NLP gaslighting of the BBC, the false arguments and lobbyist gatekeepers of GB News, the control of political parties by the Israeli lobby? Will they show the lobby documentary which showed how Shima Sot, the Israeli agent, bragged about bringing down British politicians who they didn't like? Will they be taught about false flag terror events like 7/7 and 9/11? Will they be taught about such fake news as the BBC reporting and making up a scenario that a hospital in Syria had been chemically bombed when they just made it up, and it was the most ridiculous piece of acting I think ever seen on screen? Well, apart from Emma Thompson. And yeah, what about Jane Stanley outside the Solomon Brothers building saying that it'd just been brought down by the terrorists when it was there for 23 minutes behind her? All of this stuff should be taught to children in schools. There is no doubt about that. They will teach children, it says, to differentiate between independent journalism and propaganda by looking out for bias and hyperbole in the latter. Great. Windows on the World is going into the UK curriculum. Can't wait. But I actually think it might be ousted in favour of the fake news of the BBC. It says in computer lessons, students are set to be taught how to identify unreliable sources of information. Well, they have to actually look at whether something's a fact or whether it isn't. You don't look at unreliable sources of information. It's either true or it's not. And it can be proven to be true, then it's true, isn't it? It says including spotting fake news websites by their designs, but not by what's on them. This is the beginning of arrested development for life. Many propaganda sites are crude imitations of real news outlets, it says, including those of newspapers and broadcasters, but some are becoming more realistic. Well, either the info stands up or it doesn't. The look of it is, as we've said, neither here nor there. Misinformation, it says, about the Southport attacker was amplified by Channel 13 Now, which poses as a US news outlet, but has been linked to Russia. Well, they link everything to Russia, don't they? Who's linked it to Russia? The Institute of Strategic Dialogue? The storytellers creating the far-right threat through university graduates who've been drinking the Kool-Aid for life? Pupils could also be equipped, it says, to spot Photoshop pictures of stories from real news websites, where the headline or body of the text has been changed. This week, a story purported to have been published by The Telegraph, but in fact it was fake and it was shared. The fake story claimed Labour was planning to build detainment camps on the Falkland Islands to house rioters. Well, they already have detainment camps. They're called prisons, aren't they? We've just found that out this week. At this point, the state is empowered to post obviously fake news to justify all this. And it does look, of course, like they have. It says the Telegraph is aware of an image circulating on X which purports to be a Telegraph article about emergency detainment camps. No such article has ever been published by the Telegraph. Well, it's a bit like saying Elvis's brain is on the moon, saying that there's going to be detention camps built in the Falklands, isn't it? I mean, you'd have to really dig into that with a 30-second internet search to find out it wasn't true, wouldn't you? Okay. Don't tell me, though, that there are conspiracy theories about 15-minute cities which do exist but don't exist. Yeah, The Telegraph, 8th of August 2024. Maths classes could also be changed to include how to analyse statistics in context. In what context? In your context. Because statistics can be used to prove anything, can't they? As in the Lucy Letby trial, of course. Teaching pupils to spot where figures do not back up claims they are being used to make. Well, this would be good, wouldn't it, if it really worked and they did start teaching proper critical thinking. Statistics, of course, are the steering mechanism of fake news. Lies, damn lies, and statistics, goes the quote. They should have fun with that one when the next pandemic comes along, shouldn't they? Looking at statistics. I wonder if they'll develop critical thinking about that. It says the curriculum review being led by Professor Becky Francis will report back next year, meaning its recommendations may be introduced in September 2025. Whitehall sources insisted that such measures would go hand in hand with greater education around the dangers of, wait for it, online hate. So much so soon, eh? Imagine what's coming. One said, carrying on, ultimately, we've seen this week the dangers of misinformation and how people are being sucked into dangerous online spaces. We've got to arm kids with the tools they need now and the capability to navigate a very fractious online world that changes so quickly. Mr. Stevens, in this article, said the riots showed how vulnerable we all are to disinformation and vile hatred online. No, that's not what the riots showed at all. The riots were not because of disinformation, they were because of genuine anger. Nothing to do with disinformation whatsoever. As you know, you programmed drone of a change agent. He added, "We have spoken in recent years about how to keep our children safe online, and what we have learned this week is that, left unchecked, misinformation and harmful posts can undermine all our safety." You would think that by the time these people were adults, they would start to think about what they were saying. But no, they stop thinking about what they're saying when they become adults. That is the change that we're talking about. Mr. Stevens, who held talks with the King on Friday, warned people who have incited violence online that they should prepare for a knock at your door. This is, of course, little to do with what has happened over the last week, but how totalitarian Starmer regime will operate from now on. He added that the number of people being arrested and charged would undoubtedly rise significantly. Remember, there's 800 so far, as officers combed through footage of the riots. The National Police Chiefs Council has said regional organised crime units are investigating hundreds of leads concerning social media influencers. Well, that's an easy job, isn't it? Just looking through Facebook all day, which is basically what they're doing. Better than the 7-7 Brigade, who post mass misinformation and of course, engage in online trolling, hate and abuse 24/7. OK, let's go on to the next propaganda piece from what used to be a newspaper, the Daily Telegraph. 10th of August 2024, by Ollie Korf. The number of children arrested for terror-related offences has surged. Here's why. Social media misinformation blamed as younger and younger people become involved in extremism. Well, actually, it's to do with the PREVENT programme. So student teachers and teachers in schools who overhear pupils who may be looking at websites or saying something, anything that they deem to be a little bit offensive, is now classed as terrorism. So they're told about the PREVENT programme. The PREVENT programme is one of the most useless and unpopular things that has ever happened, by the way. We've been reporting on it for at least 5, 6, maybe 10 years, because out of PREVENT came out of another strategy, which was equally useless, and it actually targets Muslims. It's extraordinarily unpopular. OK, so they show a graph from PREVENT in this article. The government anti-extremist monitoring through local councils. Remember, when PREVENT started, what had to be done was, if you were singled out through PREVENT, you would attend the local town hall with the police to be de-radicalised. It has been heavily criticised for its inaccuracy and its targeting, as we've said, of Muslims. Local councils are not equipped to deal with this, and it has been unpopular since it took over from the previous strategy. But of course, it's all about community. Community being them imposing it on you. The number, it says, of minors arrested for terror-related offences has quadrupled in less than 2 decades to a record high because of this spying by teachers on pupils and the PREVENT programme. Kids just saying things that kids would normally say, I would suggest, a lot of the time. A total of 42 under-18s were arrested for terrorism-related activities. Were any of them charged, though, with terrorism? How many were charged out of 42? I bet you it's none. Under the Terrorism Act 2000, of course, which can deem anybody to be a terrorist. That's how they actually arrest people, under the Terrorism Act, for terrorism. But how many are actually charged with terrorism? I don't think it's very many. It says this is a 5-fold increase from the average of 7.3 a year when the legislation was first introduced, official data show. Well, that tells you everything you need to know then, doesn't it? That it's the policies that are driving this to happen. It's nothing to do with terrorism. Schools are now referring more pupils to counter-terrorism agencies than the police or local authorities, increasingly in relation to extreme right-wing ideology. Are you sick of this yet? Oh, good, I'll carry on. So, when Mark Rowley made a statement through MI5 that the far right was the terror threat, which was the new terror threat, by the way, this is what they meant. The creation of Islamic terror is gone for the moment in favour of targeting the concerned indigenous population. There is, of course, no far right, and this has been confirmed even by Hope Not Hate, who say there is no organised far right. There is no individual organising the far right, and there are no far right organisations in the UK. What does that tell you? If they can't find one, then there definitely aren't any, because they find whatever they're looking for. They find 3 people in a social media group and call it a right-wing terror cell. So this in itself reveals the true purpose. More than a quarter of those charged by police for rioting over the past fortnight, it says, have been under 21, with children as young as 14 convicted. Here, as in terror referrals, the vast majority are boys. Experts say, oh, wait for it, not experts again, oh no. Experts say vulnerable boys who feel left behind are being caught out by what appears to be a worsening spread of misinformation in the online world to which they have grown so attached. Blimey. I'm just thinking back to when we set fireworks off in the schoolroom. Imagine what had happened now. Counter-terror command would be there within 15 seconds, wouldn't they? Well, I would love to get these experts into a debate, but of course they're nameless, faceless, and it will never happen. Hannah Rose, a hate and extremism analyst at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, we've covered them, a globalist non-profit dedicated to combating polarisation and disinformation, said, over the past 7 or 8 years, we've seen younger and younger people get involved in far-right extremism and terrorism. Where? Name one. Show me what terrorism was thought up by younger people in the last few years. In the last 7 or 8 years, how many young people have been convicted of a terror plot who are far right? How many? Let's see what they come up with. They don't actually name any, of course, so there aren't any. The ISD, Institute of Strategic Dialogue, produce papers which influence and are quoted by the lazy-brained cut and paste press. These papers protect certain interests in favour of silencing those outside the totalitarian narrative and nothing more. They give examples which are completely uninformed, but of course no one reads their reports anyway. And the press are given sound bites to repeat, which of course they do. I've actually read their reports, so I can say this with some confidence. They're written by what appear to be university graduates who've just been indoctrinated into propaganda and repeat it. None of these people have embedded themselves with real terrorists. They would crap themselves if they had to do that. If they had to get away from their PCs and their online work and producing their little fancy booklets and getting paid handsomely for it, going along with a control narrative, if they had to step outside that, I guarantee they would fall apart. Asked about the cause of the increase, Miss Rose pointed before all else to the effective decentralisation of extremism. There you go. That is the admission that there is no organised threat of the far right. Hope Not Hate have said it, and now they're saying it. Effective decentralisation of extremism made possible by the internet and social media in particular. So they can't name one terror group, they can't name one young person who has been convicted of terrorism in the so-called far right, which is non-existent. It says because so much is now organised online, it means that anyone can just pick up a device, log on and find really harmful material, make their own material, which children are increasingly doing, and engage with far-right ideas, she explained. You don't say. So the decentralisation of extremism actually means once again there is no organised threat to anything, just a few groups of people on such as Telegram, which are probably influenced and steered into anything that happens, such as a bit of disorder, for example, by infiltrators from UK intelligence. It has always been that way in the past, and it will continue. None of these groups are uninfiltrated. If they start out uninfiltrated, they become infiltrated quick. I know. I've been looking inside groups, not terror groups, of course, inside social groups, talking about news items for 15 years or more, and there are always embedded trolls in there. Always. 100% of the time. And it's only people who can spot this who get rid of them. Most people can't spot it. They start arguing and the group splits up. Or the infiltrators get them to appear somewhere and there's nothing to appear for, as has happened in the last week, of course. It says children increasingly have that agency and capacity to engage with a dangerous far-right movement from the, wait for it, grassroots. Well, grassroots is now their term. Grassroots means they made it up. Grassroots means it's fake. So they are actually making an admission there. If you read between the lines, their grassroots organisations are what are organising the so-called non-existent far-right. According to Ofcom, 99% of children in the UK regularly spend time online, and 9 in 10 have a mobile phone by the age of 11. And what does that prove? Nothing. The communications regulator also recently noted a blurred boundary between the lives children lead online and the real world. Yes, of course, because they play computer games, which are far more dangerous in blurring reality than engaging on any social media platform. Okay, it now says extremist networks. Extremist networks exploit vulnerabilities. Miss Rose again. Oh, Miss Rose. What have you got to say? Young people who feel isolated are increasingly able to go online and find community, which conceptually is a good thing. People can feel like they are part of something. Talk about stating the bloody obvious. However, there's always a however, we know that extremist networks exploit those vulnerabilities, particularly among young people who are at a time of identity formation, thrill-seeking, counterculture and rebellion. Oh, what happened to that? And which ones? Have you got any? No, thought not. These sentiments, she says, are exploited by the far right in order to bring them into their own group. So it makes them feel like they are part of something and that they have a specific enemy they can blame, and only serves to further isolate them from any potential support or off-ramps. I don't know what she's talking about, but it's probably change agent jargon. But can you see how one-sided this is? This is just one-sided. It's just quite unbelievable. But it wouldn't be that important unless all of the UK media and international media take press releases and quotes from these idiots and print it as fact. So, it says, the Southport Wake Up Telegram channel was set up within hours of the fatal stabbing of 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift-themed dance event on the morning of the July 29th. Well, how do we know it wasn't the intelligence services who set that up? We don't know at all, do we? So it's 50-50 on that. In fact, it's probably more like 60-40. The feed went on to broadcast details of local protests and threatening specific people by name. In that case, I would say this is probably, in my opinion, 100% set up by the state. Threatening specific people by name for almost a week before it went private, by which point it had gathered almost 15,000 members. Well, did anything come from these specific threats against specific people? No, thought not. Monthly downloads of Telegram, a Russian-founded messenger app, well, Telegram was set up by a Russian fella, I think, have crept up in the UK over the past few years, even as other platforms slipped into decline. Researchers found more than a quarter of its worldwide user base to be under 25. Now, this is interesting because Telegram was used by all the fake truther groups. They all started using Telegram. Why? Because they were steered to use it. Telegram is now the favoured platform for infiltration, the intelligence services, and the 7-7 Brigade. That's just a fact, because I've seen the nonsense that's in there. Tommy Robinson News, the eponymous channel operated by the right-wing activist whose real name, as we know, of course, is Stephen Yaxley Lenin. Everyone knows that now because they put it in every article. It says currently has some 107,000 members on Telegram. banned from X, then Twitter, well, Twitter was X, in March 2018, Robinson was reinstated last November following Elon Musk's takeover of the company. His following there, where the majority of discussions happen out in the open, now verges on 1 million. Tommy Robinson, it says, exploited X to spread division. His posts were viewed more than 434 million times over the week since, wait, I bet you're sick of hearing it, far-right riots targeting Muslims and migrants first broke out. According to analysis by the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, if you read their stuff, it's just as bad, if not worse, than the Institute of Strategic Dialogue and Hope Not Hate. The platform had, wait for it, fact-checked just one of Robinson's posts during that time. Unfortunately, though, his silence documentary, that's Tommy's silence documentary, is fact-checked and the state come off very, very badly. In actual fact, perverting the course of public justice. Well, will the kids in school be told about the propaganda surrounding the Syrian pupil and what actually happened in the playground? No. Over the year to March 2023, the latest for which data is available, a record 2/5 of referrals to prevent were under 15s, were the second most represented age group, at 31% of the total aged 15 to 20, at 32%. Children aged 14 and under accounted for the largest proportion of referrals for extreme right-wing radicalisation in 22-23. Shows you just what a pile of crap the Prevent strategy actually is. For the second year in a row, 35%. This is up from just 20.8% in 2016-17. So the overreaction of teachers to what's said in the classroom has just contributed to this complete time wasting. As we've said, how many have been charged? How many terror groups have been uncovered? None. Richard Collard, the Associate Head of Child Safety Online Policy at the NSPCC, told The Telegraph, boys are being targeted with misogynistic and often racist hate on social media because companies have not got their algorithms in check. Oh, yes, they have. The algorithms are totally in check. The Online Safety Act, which will impose a range of duties on social media companies destined to make the UK, wait for it, the safest place in the world to be a child online, apart from China, of course, passed Parliament last year, but is not expected to be fully implemented until 2025. While recognising its benefits, Mr Ahmed emphasised that the Act's biggest weakness was its lack of statutory data access pathways that would empower researchers to understand and expose the mechanisms behind online radicalisation. How patronising. What he means is more surveillance powers which will surely accompany this. Yes, corporations in partnership with government harvesting data for sale to anyone who wants to buy it. Of course, the Met Police Chief Mark Rowley, a propagandist soundbite merchant who has been full on with totalitarian rhetoric since the coup, is heading one such company called Black Dot. Mr Collard of the NSPCC urged tech firms not to wait for Ofcom to take enforcement measures to act. Platforms must take decisive action now to ensure children are protected from vile racism, misogyny and misinformation online. He didn't mention pornography though, did he? He didn't mention self-harm. He didn't mention psychologically disturbing content, which is actually state approved. Didn't mention any of that, of course, did he? Mr Ahmed stressed the radicalisation of young people is not the fault of the children themselves. Kids are less resilient to disinformation narratives and less resilient to lies simply because they don't know as much truth. They haven't got as much life experience. Now, in my experience from years ago, it's actually the opposite of that. Children, once they get up to about the age of 8, are very discriminating about what's true and what isn't. But they have to be patronised by idiots like this, of course. He says it's bonkers to blame them for not being able to pass through stuff when most adults can't sort their way through disinformation either. Well, adults, of course, are programmed, aren't they? Children haven't been programmed yet. Anyway, yes, adults can't sort their way through disinformation. That is what the state needs. If you can't find your way through the misinformation, then you can join the community of the globalist Starmer regime. Of course, never was a truer word said. Most cannot see their way out of the two lies. Those that can are ahead of the whole agenda, like you, dear listener, and that is a good place to be. I hope you enjoyed that. Do support the show if you can. We're being marginalised all over the place, and things are only going to get worse. Download the shows. We've had a big drop in downloads since Spreaker made people sign in before they can download, but you can download on Podbean. So we dropped off on Spreaker. More people are now downloading from Podbean, which is good. Download from Podbean if you don't want to sign into Spreaker. The link's on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. Do support the show if you can. There's a PayPal and Patreon on the homepage. The most marginalised show in all of media. Am I paranoid? Yes. That's a good thing at this particular moment in time. Until the next show, thanks a lot, and do check out the live stream we did at Windows on the World on our YouTube channel, and also, of course, more importantly, our Odyssey channel.